Hello, everyone, and welcome back down here to the Gamer's Den with me, your host, Jordan, your master of lore and storyteller extraordinaire. Now, don't recall if I'd mentioned this yet, but it would seem the Gamer's Den is going to be moving soon once again, and given that it's also in the midst of the holiday season and other family events that have had the unfortunate timing to have occurred right around now, well, week or two ago, it's presented me with some challenges in regards to keeping up once again. So, as always, I am not only am I your master of lore, I am your perpetually late and somewhat bedraggled and unkempt master of lore on top of all of this as well. But that said, while I have not been able to work on everything I've been wanting to, I still want to produce some kind of content for you folks out there. And there is one question that was thrown at me sort of recently from a subscriber and also a friend of mine. Posed the question, why am I doing these player's guides? And why am I doing them in such a way that focuses more on the optimization route rather than the talking about the role-playing aspects? And I thought maybe I'd take a moment to answer that question, because if one person has this question, perhaps there are others out there. Certainly there will be more, I hope, at some point that have this question. Why am I taking a look at these character classes through the lens of optimization? And I should also note that most of these character guides so far, the witch's build, the monk, the fighter, these have been specific to the Pathfinder setting, the first edition Pathfinder setting. Haven't gotten to play second edition yet, though I've gotten to have a close look at it, and I like it. It's not my favorite setting. I'm not that hardcore into edition wars. Well, except for maybe where 4th edition Dungeons & Dragons is concerned, but that's a whole nother can of worms that we'll get into another time. But, 2nd edition Pathfinders feels like the Starfinder setting, only fantasy instead of fantasy sci-fi. And, but thing of it is that that's what I'm focusing on right now. It's what, other than 3rd edition Dungeons & Dragons and to a certain extent 5th and Shadowrun, I guess in Rollmaster, but it's what I'm focusing on because it's what I have the most experience with running. It's what I'm most familiar with mechanically, and, well, that's just what I've decided to start with. It was the easiest start point for me to go with. But as for the why, I'm looking at things through the lens of mechanical effectiveness, just breaking things down to more of a numbers and what effects certain skills, abilities, or spells may have. Is as opposed to the RP, well, there's a very, very easy baseline to work with there when it comes to what is the most mechanically effective, what is going to give you the biggest yield. As the mechanics are right there, the numbers are right there, and if you're thinking about things in terms of the action economy, how much damage you're doing, what effect you're actually having on the battle, that's quantifiable. Whereas if we were to take a look at the roleplay aspect of everything, that is much harder to pin down. That's not so concrete, and it's so dependent on so many factors. Whereas if you're looking at numbers, the numbers are going to stay the same and consistent. You're going to have a certain mathematical range to work with. The rules as written are not going to change a whole lot, even if in some cases they may be a little bit on the ambiguous side of things. So focusing on things from a mechanical standpoint gives us a nice, solid, comfortable baseline to work from. It's something that's going to be consistent. Now, whether or not people agree, or if they know about any other things that might synergize a bit better and produce a greater effect, well, that's just something that we can learn about. It's something that's, again, is going to be set and consistent, and that's something you can discuss with a relative, in a very brief fashion. There's a certain amount of brevity to it, whereas with roleplay, you can just go on and on and on, back and forth, without really stopping a whole lot. And while I do favor roleplay more than just straight numbers, there's a lot there. That's a lot to unpack, and I don't know that you could ever really rightly have it thoroughly thought out for any one class or even any one set bunch of abilities. Just as a prime example of this, of a character that was not the most mechanically sound, but was absolutely one of my most favorite characters, and is actually a favorite character of the player, and that's Dimitri. He's a tiefling rogue, and some of you out there might be groaning already, thinking, typical edgelord nonsense. All tieflings are edgelords, and the fact that he's a rogue to boot, sneaky, backstabby, throaty, cutty kind of characters, like, Dimitri kind of was those things, but that wasn't all he was. We had a lot of fun with Dimitri, especially since the player failed to give me much in the way of a backstory, and then not only that, gave me permission to play with things a little bit, but we may save that as a story from the table kind of a thing down the line. Suffice it to say, this character was not built with a certain amount of mechanical effectiveness in mind, or at least, not anything up front. What do I mean by that? Well, first off, he was a rogue. Okay, there's nothing wrong with that. And then he decided he wanted to learn a little bit of magic and took a couple of levels of wizards. Like, okay, so he mixed and matched a little bit, and all the rogue levels that he has kind of help with that, help with keeping him out of sight, out of mind, and if he's learning a little bit of magic to go with things, that can certainly round out and even assist some of his abilities if he's using a lot of illusions or spells to kind of create zones of silence or help create darkness that he can just meld himself into a bit more effectively. That can work out really well, and that's still within that realm of mechanical effectiveness, although he's even more of a glass cannon now, can put out a lot of damage, but cannot really stand up all that much to incoming damage that he might receive. Well, then he also took some levels of the prestige class Shadow Dancer, so it's like, okay, that's 3 separate classes. That's starting to stretch things a little bit, but Shadow Dancer does mesh pretty nicely with Rogue, so there's still a great level of synergy there, and the Shadow Step and Shadow Companion abilities, those really work out nicely, and you know what, the magic can still complement that a bit. Well, then he added a 4th class, Master of Masks, out of one of the Splat books. I think it was the Unearthed Arcana book. In any case, is a class that, depending on which magical mask that he was wearing, would give him different abilities and also cause his alignment to register as something, other than what it was. And that's something that relies a bit more on the magic-oriented classes, which is why he took a couple of levels of Wizard. Now, all in all, this was a level 15 character with, what was it? I want to say 7 levels of Rogue, 6 levels of Shadow Dancer, 3 levels of Wizard, and 2 or 3 levels. I've lost track because I've just started adding up past 15 there pretty quick, I think. But suffice it to say, the character was kind of pulling in a couple of different directions there, and I actually had a talk with him. It's like, do you want to focus a little bit more on what Dimitri's doing? Because, pulling around in so many different areas, that's tricky. I mean, I love this character. I'd love to see him stick around, but, while I do believe in adapting situations, both combat, roleplay, or skill-oriented encounters to what the party's capable of, there are certain limitations, I believe, to what I can reasonably do, both in favor of the players and going against them. I can't, if a situation demands that NPCs respond very heavy-handedly and with overwhelming force or overwhelming effort, I'm probably going to go with that without really mitigating a whole lot, because that's what would happen in the situation. That's what would make sense, and to do otherwise might be starting to break away that suspension of disbelief there and break immersion for the players. So, and they had that conversation. He's like, no, 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 don't worry. It'll be fine. It'll work out. And you know what? It actually kind of did. Because now we have a rogue that can throw out a little bit of magic, some zones of darkness, and create even further actual natural shadows as a result. Step through them several feet away, I think something like 100 feet or so, and then plop on a mask, and then he has a magic item, a hat of disguise, where he can change his appearance, throw on the mask to alter his alignment, and because of his ability, his just absolutely overly stacked bluff skill, when people come running by looking for Dimitri, they don't find Dimitri, they find some haggard old crone or some grifter on the street there running a shoddy game of chance. And if they happen to have any items or magic that help them detect alignment, well, they're not going to pick up Dimitri's alignment. He's not going to look like a tiefling. He's a human. He's a dwarf or a halfling. He's something other than what they're looking for. And you know what? Mechanically, that actually ended up working out okay. Also because, I also favor the roleplay aspect of it all as well. And the roleplay just came through so well. It was very well thought out. And while I do love me some combat encounters, not everything is going to purely be combat. Nor do I think everything should purely be about combat. So, in this instance, this character with me DMing, and possibly if he were to be getting run in any adventures with any of my other friends, if they decide to take up the mantle of DM, maybe this character would work out well and thrive. And I'd like to think he'd thrive at several other tables as well, just because of how clever the player is. And that also brings up another point for me. This character works well within this particular circle of friends, and maybe our own other little individual circles that may take up gaming now and then. This particular locale, this group, this particular strain of nerd in this region of western Montana, this kind of role-playing tends to work out fairly well. It's not going to work from table to table to table, and that's another thing. That's where focusing on things mechanically tends to work out a little bit better for these kinds of videos, because that will translate and carry over from group to group to group to group pretty well, because again, it's just flat numbers and mechanics. That changes, sure, if you do some homebrew stuff, or if you find some esoteric rules or splat books to assist with all of this, but, that's still limited and quantifiable, whereas the roleplay aspects, that will differ from group to group on what's focused on, what's accepted, how things are ruled on. It ties back into the wide myriad number of ways that things could be interpreted or looked at, or how things might change, how a dynamic might be different given a certain situation at hand. So again, that's why I'm focusing more on the purely mechanical, even though myself, I don't like to focus just on the strictly mechanical. I like interesting choices. I myself made a fighter who, yes, was mechanically effective, but I took a couple of extra skill points here and there and I dumped them into craft painting because I wanted my fighter to have a little bit of a personality. That, and I tied into this whole, plenty of you are probably kung fu film fans, like watching martial arts action flicks. There's this whole thing where a lot of great sword fighters start learning to do calligraphy and the like, a lot of wrist and hand motions and arm motions. And they learn this in order to assist them with their sword play and the like. And, I wanted to throw that in there, both to give the character a little bit more personality, and this is a way of him, using his motor skills, his fine motor skills, to help improve his sword play, at least from a storytelling perspective. Well, really, that's all I have to say on that particular subject. I know I've made just a little under 15 minutes worth of video here, just expounding on the subject to say I do it because it makes it easier for this to translate from group to group to group to group. But with that said, I've been your host, Jordan, your master of lore and storyteller extraordinaire. I hope you enjoyed today's video. I hope the holiday season is treating you all well. But for now, I'm going to go ahead and say good night. I hope you all have a good night as well. Oh, and by the way, I'm not quite sure what build guide to go on to next. There's so many other classes out there. Bear in mind, I've done Fighter, Monk, and Witch now. So, you take the opportunity, go down into the comments section below and vote on which character class you'd like to see me do a mechanically effective build guide out of next. We have rogues, clerics, bards, barbarians, cavaliers, alchemists, so many more options out there. If I had to ask for a particular preference, I'd like to do something that doesn't have quite so many spells to work with right now, just because after doing the witch, oh god, it's so much work, so many spells to read through, so many things to pick and choose from to add into the slides. But then again, I am, of course, a humble master of lore, and I work at the behest of you fine folks, you students, you alumni, you members here at the Gamers Den. So please, go down below, cast your votes, make your voices heard, let your voices ring through the mountains. And with that, once again, I've been your host. You all have a good night.